Thanks a lot for coming in.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Something about this community appeals to you?
This is a wonderful place to live.
For Kelowna Now, this is Camp Mulgat. And we're joined by MP Tracy Gray from Kelowna Lake Country, and this is our first couch interview since the pandemic, so congratulations.
It has, yeah, it is. It's great to be back here.
Yeah, so Kelowna voters, Kelowna Lake Country voters sent you off to Ottawa for what turned out to be a pretty strange time. How has this adventure been for you?
Well, you know, we only had a couple of months, and then we were literally into the pandemic. So, you know, we were thrown into this situation of people trying to get home from all over the world, and everything was closed down, businesses closed, Service Canada offices closed for a big part of last year. So where do people turn? They turn to their MP office. So we've been working nonstop for 16 months now. Right. You know, trying to help people as best we can, and of course it's changed over time. You know what people's needs were and what the situations were. So
right, but you have nothing to compare it to. But some of the MPs who have been around a while were saying that this no, Tracy, it's normally not quite this busy.
Yeah, I had a long-serving MP tell me recently that our 18 months have been volume-wise of work and intensity of normally what 6 years would have work would be. So. Just to put it into perspective.
Yeah. So down to the work of Parliament, there was some very interesting legislation that you were working alongside and criticizing, etc. One of them is Bill C-10, where the federal government is looking at ways that it could maybe put a hand on some of the social media content that goes out there in a way similar to how they handle broadcast information. But you're pretty critical of the direction of Bill C-10?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that this is probably the legislation that I've received the most amount of correspondence on this year, and a lot of people are really not happy with it. And so there's a couple of parts with Bill C-10. There's the part with users uploading content, and there's been a lot of confusion from the government, in particular from the Heritage Minister, where he said that, well, this doesn't really affect you uploading what you want, well, unless you have a lot of followers. So it's been really confusing. But the other part of it is what's called net neutrality, and net neutrality means the flow of information that you have access to. And so the concerns are that this would change net neutrality, so that when you search something, you may not see, after this bill passes and once the CRTC puts in the regulations, the same things that you see now.
Right. So is it your view that even if the intentions of the federal government through the CRTC are good, are you just against it just because it is getting in the way of people and the information they want? Is it just a full stop for you?
Well, the way that it is right now, this is changing the Broadcast Act. And there's a lot of people that have come out that are experts in the field, one of which is Michael Geist. If anybody wants to search him, it's G-E-I-S-T. He's a professor of internet and e-commerce law, and he's been very vocal on this. He has a website. He's written all kinds of articles, saying how this isn't good legislation the way that it is. Also, what it does is it gives the CRTC authority to come up with their own rules and to regulate this, and it's not really clear.
But is there any way it could be rewritten and get your support? It sounds like your disapproval of the idea is pretty entrenched.
Well, the way it is right now, and there's been a number of recommendations that have been made, and one of the issues as well is at the committee that was studying this, the committee started voting before all of the recommendations were even debated and discussed.
Right.
So that process hasn't actually happened in a wholesome way.
Okay, moving on to lumber. Anyone who's tried to buy a sheet of plywood lately knows that something crazy is going on, and it coincides with a time when we've had 6 years or so, maybe getting close to 7 years going by without a softwood lumber agreement with the United States. You wrote about it in your MP report that it's high time that the government get going on that. What's the holdup?
Well, absolutely. So since 2015, when the last softwood lumber agreement expired, we haven't negotiated a new agreement, and also part of it is with the new NAFTA, which is called CUSMA, it was not negotiated into CUSMA either. And so we're really left with no way to really a concrete way to deal with this. And so what can happen is the U.S. can put on tariffs, and that's exactly what they announced just over a month ago. So they announced that they were going to be doubling the tariffs on softwood lumber to the U.S. And you might think, well, how does that affect us here in Canada? And we've done a fair amount of outreach on this and meeting with stakeholders, and what we've heard is that because our supply chains are so integrated, that when costs go up in the US, it actually affects us here in Canada. And also too, we don't have as much capacity as we had back in 2015 because of the instability and uncertainty to the industry. There's been a lot of closures. We've probably heard about that over the last few years, a lot of layoffs, mill closures, and so we've lost our capacity. And so when you actually look at charts of North America production, Canada has done this and the US has done this.
So you put that all together and you think if we had a working agreement and less frustrations at the border, that we could wind up with maybe even an easing of some of the lumber prices we currently see?
Well, it's definitely part of it. It's definitely what's adding to it. And at the time when this announcement happened, we called an emergency committee meeting to have the minister responsible for international trade to come and answer questions, and also officials. And what we heard was that there was very little communication. We didn't hear of actually any concrete meetings that had happened, and so now we keep pressing. Now we understand that there are meetings that are going to start happening. That was just announced this week actually. So we're looking forward to those negotiations starting.
Right. Another interesting topic that you raise in your MP reports is the departure of Judy Payette, the Governor General, whose office apparently was not a good place to work. Understatement, perhaps. So it wasn't so much about that as opposed to what that costs Canadians. For the rest of her life, she gets an annual salary of $150,000 a year, plus an expense account of up to $206,000. Is that too much?
So I was very happy to second a private member's bill from one of my colleagues to actually stop that from happening. And I did hear from a lot of constituents here saying, that's not great spending of taxpayer dollars.
So if someone was to depart under circumstances that aren't so great, that should be somehow diminished or cut off completely? What do you think?
Yeah, so part of that private member's bill was under 5 years. So basically, within that time, unless it was due to health reasons, like unless someone had health reasons that they had to depart the office.
I see. In other words, you have to put a certain number of years in the office before you would earn
absolutely
that sort of pension.
Absolutely.
And she never made it very far.
Not even close, yeah.
There was another one that came up that brought you some attention, not all of it positive, and that's how you voted on Bill C-6, which was to make it illegal for this conversion therapy that some people, young people, have been put through, where turns out they've got a sexual orientation or a gender identity that someone in their life doesn't agree with, and they get sent off to get changed. So this bill would seek to make that illegal, but you voted against it. And I think a lot of people, LGBTQ plus, really felt betrayed by you on that. So what was going on there?
So with that particular legislation, conversion therapy is abhorrent and it should be illegal. This is strictly a bill that is a part of the criminal code, and I voted for it in second reading for it to go to committee, and the committee that it goes to is the Justice and Human Rights Committee. There's work that was done there, and of course, other communication as well. And there was a concern with some of the wording in the bill that it would equate having conversations at the same level as the abhorrent act of conversion therapy. And so, one would question why the government wouldn't be amicable to having some simple wording, just put into the bill.
Right. So some of the critics, I saw the submissions that came into the committee, and they were describing how the definition was just too broad. I think the way it's put in the actual legislation is practice, treatment, or service. Now, I have a hard time getting from that definition to, just a conversation, because could you get those two confused? Is your point, though, that the definition was just too broad?
Yeah, from what we heard, and other people that had reached out to me directly as well, was that it needed clarification, and there were a lot of concerns. The other part of this as well is it would be curious to to ask the Liberals, if this was so important to them, why they didn't bring it forth when they had the majority government in 2015 to 2019. So here we are now, and so the stage that it's at right now is it's at the Senate. And the Senate also did not approve of it. They could have voted for it voted in favor, and however, what they did was there were concerns in the wording as well expressed at the Senate, and now it has been sent to a Senate committee. So a Senate committee will do its work. It'll go through the legislation, and that's where it's at right now.
So I've spoken to. It's hard to find anyone who represents a broad number of people, but I've spoken to people who are connected to the LGBTQ plus community, and people are pretty upset about this. I think that whatever support you had in that particular area is a bit lost here. Do you have fences to mend?
Well, I've had a number of people reach out to me, both from all over the community, and I've had a number of conversations with people. And all I can say is I can say why I voted the way that I did, and people may or may not agree with it. But I've expressed why I voted the way that I did, and as I said, it's at the Senate, and there was also concerns at the Senate, which it did not pass. So now it's at a Senate committee, and they'll continue on with their work, and we'll see what they come up with.
All right, moving on. We've had this horrible news emerge lately about unmarked graves, first in Kamloops, then on the prairies, hundreds and hundreds of young lives gone for who knows why in these unmarked graves. So that brings up the issue of residential schools. A major point of discussion by the federal government's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and you point out that so many of the recommendations seem to have just gotten shelved, or they're not being acted upon soon enough, at least.
So when the Truth and Reconciliation Report came out in 2015, it does have a number of recommendations, and there is a section in there on residential schools. And so as the official opposition, what we have called on the government to do, and specifically it's point 71 to 76, and we've called on the government to put together comprehensive plans to action those items. We've also called on the government to allocate resources that might be needed, and also called on the government to assist communities in whatever ways that they need assisting. And that would be up to the community themselves to determine, what assistance they might need.
And there's so much pressure coming from all directions for them to act. I guess we can probably expect that there will be more action on those items that came out of the commission.
Well, we would hope, and like I said, we've called on the government to take a number of actions, and there were other things as well that happened in Parliament where we were supportive. I think as this evolves, we need to be very respectful and to have compassion and to support their communities.
Right, and it was nice to see that the Conservatives didn't just act as critics. There were some pretty interesting private members' bills that actually ended up getting accepted in the end. One of them that I like is that there's a bill that'll make it easier to become an organ donor. Am I right?
Absolutely, yeah. That was we had some great private members' bills that came through right at the end of Parliament, and they went to the Senate, and they were approved of it in the Senate. So they've received royal assent. So they're actually law now, and one of them was that exactly. And so this would be when you do your personal taxes every year that you would check off that you want to be an organ donor. So it's a really easy way to to participate in that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've got a bunch of things still on the list we need to talk about, so let's bring you back here another time. But thanks for getting the couch warm again.
It is great to be here in person.
All right.
And see you in person.
Thanks.
Thank you
Tracy
so
Gray.
much.
And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.